Minister, can I welcome the announcement of Operation Thor? Can I welcome the focus on rural crime and the overtime allocation that you've provided to the Gardaí? And I want to welcome it, Minister, because in this country at the moment there is a burglary recorded by An Garda Síochána every 20 minutes. And that is another victim of burglary, where they have to deal with the impact of the intrusion, the insecurity that causes in their home, the vulnerability that creates for that person or family. And people feel isolated. Even if they're living in a housing estate with hundreds of people around them, they feel isolated on foot of having someone violate their own personal space and burgle their home. But sadly, Minister, and what's really frustrating for members of An Garda Síochána that I've spoken to is that it has been very much more a public relations exercise than actual practical resources to the Gardaí. Now, I know it will take time for this to feed in, but the Gardaí need those resources, and they need those resources now. And they're still waiting on these high-powered vehicles. I know they have been ordered, but we need them, and we need them now, Minister, not in a number of months' time. And we need to fill the vacant posts that are there within the Traffic Corps. They're to be given a special role in relation to Operation Thor, but 4 out of 10 posts within the Traffic Corps are vacant at the moment. So it is very hard to operate Operation Thor when you don't have the basic resources that are needed in relation to that. And speaking of the issue of basic resources, Minister, I have a Garda station in my constituency where it doesn't have a car whatsoever. No car is actually available to it. So, like in that situation, where you have a member of the Gardaí at a strategic location in my constituency, with a very busy road going through his area, how is he supposed to compete with a high-powered car? Does he take out his bike? Does he stand in the middle of the road and put up his lav to try and stop them? That's what we're dealing with in relation to the available resources that are being provided to some of the remaining rural Garda stations that are there. And as I say, I welcome the overtime allocation that's being provided. But the difficulty is when you spread that across the country, in practical terms, what we're doing is allocating 7 minutes every day in rural parishes across the rural Garda districts across this country. Now, 7 minutes of overtime, Minister, is not going to have an impact in policing these rural communities, and additional resources and dedicated resources are going to have to be put in if we're going to deal in real, genuine, practical terms with the issue and the fear that's out there at the moment. And while on one hand additional overtime is being given to the Garda districts, at the other time some of the specialist units are seeing their overtime allocation actually cut. Specialist units that are at the front line and that can help to deal with these particular thugs that are persistent offenders. And yes, we have had a cut in relation to the number of Garda stations across the country. But if we look at the ones that remain, take for example Boyle in County Roscommon. It's now a sub-district of Castlereagh. The Boyle sub-district office covers the north and the east of County Roscommon. It has some major roads, including the main Sligo-Dublin road going through that district. Part of the main Dublin-Westport road goes through that sub-district. And yet you need to have a calendar to find out what are the opening times of that Garda station, because it's one of the only Garda stations in my constituency that doesn't have regular opening times. It has opening times that vary at 4 different times in the week, 4 different sets of opening times. So unless you have a calendar and know which day of the week it is, you don't know whether the Garda station is open and available to contact the Gardaí or to seek their assistance or information from them. And Minister, that just is not good enough. There needs to be, people should know that their Garda station is open from 9 to 5 or from 3 to 4 Monday to Sunday, and that they can access a guard there at those times. And I listened last night in the car to the advertisements that have been put out by the Gardaí now in relation to Operation Thor. And the message is going out there, and rightfully so, encouraging people to lock up and to light up. But it forgot to say that, and what's happening in reality is, Minister, that people are also loading up. Because communities and individuals are sadly now taking the law into their own hands. We have reports from farmers in border counties that the only way that they can get results regarding the removal of stock from their lands is to actually go out and confront the individuals that have taken the stock with their gun and have them returned. And they're getting them back. But surely, if the farmers in the local community know who's doing this, the Gardaí also know who's at it, but they obviously do not have the resources to secure convictions. And it's not just in the border counties. This is happening in my own part of the country, where we've seen a litany of stock, incidents of stock being stolen, of burglaries, and it's all down to local information. Local information that is being passed on to these individuals. And what's really frustrating about it is that not only do the Gardaí not know the people in their own communities anymore, they don't even know the geography. I was talking to a constituent last week who ran the district Garda headquarters and he was asked for his address, and he gave his address as Top McConnell. And the guard at the end of the phone asked him, "Where's that?" Now, funny enough, Top McConnell is one of the few rural Garda stations that's left in my constituency. But that guard did not know where geographically that individual was when they were ringing in. So if the Gardaí don't even know the geography of the area, it's very hard to actually police that. And because of that, Minister, and because of the fear that's out there at the moment, people are literally driving around with shotguns in their jeeps. They're sleeping with shotguns in their beds. And I'm genuinely afraid that we're going to have another story like Porricknally in the not-too-distant future, unless we can resource the Gardaí and bring back a level of security, particularly in rural communities, that is not there today. Now, the Gardaí have stated that 75% of burglaries are carried out by 25% of burglars. And we need to put measures in place to get them off the streets and to keep them off the streets. And Minister, you're to be complimented in relation to this piece of legislation by introducing consecutive sentences for repeat offenders, which will help to do that. But can I make a few other suggestions to you, Minister, constructive suggestions that I believe that can strengthen the provisions that you're making here? And that is, first of all, Minister, I think similar provision needs to be made for the handling of stolen goods. And the reason that I ask you to do that, Minister, is that it is far easier to secure evidence on a conviction in relation to the handling of stolen goods than actually for burglary, because it's much easier to prove possession than to catch people in the act. And the Gardaí tell me that it is very, very difficult to secure a conviction in the first place in relation to burglary unless they catch the individual in the act, or that there is forensic evidence linking them back to that particular home. However, if the Gardaí at these checkpoints can actually stop the individuals who are in possession of materials that have been stolen from a home or a particular location, they can prosecute them for possession. But the difficulty is we're back to the same problems that we have again, that possession is not treated as serious as burglary, and we again have the situation where they're concurrent rather than consecutive sentences. So I think, Minister, we need to strengthen the law here to deal with those caught in possession of stolen goods, because, as you've said yourself, one of your objectives is to try and cut out the routes for the sale and distribution of stolen goods. So I think it is important that the law in this area is strengthened. The other thing I think that needs to be done, Minister, is that we need additional circuit court sittings to deal in some parts of the country with the backlog that we have. And we need to appoint additional circuit court judges, maybe on a floating panel, to deal with the backlog as it arises in different parts of the country. Because I'm being told that one of the reasons why the judiciary are so generous in relation to bail is that in some parts of the country it's taking up to 2 years for a case to come to court, and if the timeline was far less, the judiciary would be far more sympathetic to having that individual remain in prison until the court hearing takes place. And, you know, it is hugely frustrating to read reports like we had in the papers last week, where one of the nation's most prolific burglars has again been released on bail, despite the protests of the Gardaí that he may flee the country and never be seen again. He's supposed to be connected with up to 60 burglaries in the Limerick and Dublin areas and the south and southeast. The Gardaí believe that the individual is one of Ireland's most prolific robbers and has dedicated a lifetime to this particular trade. And the guards are out there, they're arresting these individuals, they're charging these individuals, they're then bringing them before the courts, they're being released on bail so that they can actually commit further burglaries again. And your own officials have admitted at the Public Accounts Committee that this has happened 6 or 7 times in 1 month in relation to an individual in and out, back out on bail again. And Minister, that just has to stop. And I know that that is your intention in relation to this legislation, but it is important that in tandem with the enactment of this legislation, that clear guidelines are issued by the presidents of the courts to ensure that people are not being released back out into communities on bail. And I know that you have spoken about the issue of tagging, Minister, and I know quite a number of the speakers here during this debate have spoken on the issue of tagging. And as you know, 33 burglaries a week are being committed by those who are out on bail, and at the same time we have 60 electronic tags available to us. 50 of them in a cardboard box gathering dust at the moment, even though the state is picking up the bill for those. And they remain in storage because the 2007 Criminal Justice Act, which allows for the tagging of people while out on bail, awaits your signature. Now, I know, Minister, the argument that you've put forward, or your officials have put forward in relation to this, is that you don't want to tag everyone that's out on bail. But surely, Minister, it is your intention to tag a cohort of people that are out on bail. That's what you have said consistently in your public comments on tagging. The tags are there. The primary legislation is there to do that. So could we not sign that legislation and have it enacted, and issue guidelines to the courts in relation to what type of individual should have the electronic tag on them? Because the law at the moment, as it is drafted and passed by this House, provides the courts with the discretion on whether to tag or not tag an individual. So what it requires, Minister, is 2 things. 1, your signature. and 2, that guidelines would be issued on what type of an individual where the electronic tagging would apply to, and that those guidelines would be along the lines of the proposed amendments that you're talking about in the new bail bill. It's a way to fast-track and introduce tagging literally tomorrow morning, Minister. With your signature, it can be brought in. It can be brought in on a trial basis, even in certain parts of the country, to deal with some of the cohort of individuals that we're talking about. But it is and can be introduced, as I say, tomorrow morning. The final request that I have for you, Minister, is that where someone avails of free legal aid for criminal offences and they're back before the courts again and again, then there should be a clawback on their social welfare or on their other income in relation to those court costs. Because the difficulty is at the moment, Minister, that if someone is apprehended and someone, let's say, that's caught red-handed, literally coming out the door of a house with either the jewellery or the television under their arm, and they end up on indictment before the circuit court, and particularly in parts of the country where there's a big backlog, they will seek to have their case held before a jury. And why wouldn't they? It gives them 2 years out to rob wherever they like over a 2-year period while they're waiting for this to come back before the courts. And there's no cost on them. When they come out of prison at the end of it, they'll have their loot, they'll still have their social welfare or what other income that is available to them. And surely, Minister, if we're introducing in this House the attachment of earnings on someone who doesn't pay their television licence, has a fine imposed on them, and we're taking away some of their social welfare to pay for that, or some of their income to pay for that, I don't think it is too much to ask if someone is coming before the courts again and again, is using the court system to delay justice and the enforcement of justice, that when they have an income, that some of that income should be used to contribute towards the cost of their legal representation in the first place. And I think that that needs to be brought in here. We're very anxious, you know, to persecute people in relation to overpayments or for not paying their television licence. Well, it's about time that these individuals start paying for the cost of tying up court time and tying up limited resources that should be used and should be available for genuine cases where people need a defence.